Across centuries, the Aegean Sea remains the timeless world of myth. In myth, we store our oldest memories, journey to our beginnings, walk the streets of towns fallen to rubble 1,000 years before we were born. Anchored at Dia, a small bare island off the north coast of Crete, the Calypso too will make such a journey, backward into time. It all began with a chance aerial photograph. I had, of course, encountered the Atlantis legend in many places. Indeed, my son Philippe traveled to the Azores, Coco Island, Bimini, and elsewhere to investigate claims that each is Atlantis. Yet, as I studied the photographic blow-ups of an odd thumb-like shape outlined under the waters of St. George's Bay, I did not then imagine where it would lead. I hardly suspected that soon I, too, would find myself embarked on a new quest, pursuing a myth, without familiar landmarks or stars, searching for the long-lost civilization of Atlantis that many still believe lies buried under the sea.
Like the record of Earth itself, the history of man often is hidden in riddles. A strangely carved stone in a wilderness, a city entombed in volcanic ash, its life caught in an endless pause, a ruin or shipwreck swallowed by the sea. Yet men insist on answers, sometimes true, sometimes fanciful. In the clear waters of the Bahama Shallows off Florida, Jacques Cousteau and his airborne team will find both. Beneath the wings of the PBY, a perfectly round islet lies like a stain on the sea. Here, submerged sandforms are constantly reshaped by shifting tides and currents. There, a broken line of coral reefs. From the plane's side blister, Philippe views a stranger apparition, a geometric pattern similar to ancient landscape designs, often believed signals to space. But the intersecting dotted lines are only the seismic blast holes left by survey teams searching for oil. A blue hole, which often is described as unfathomable, but actually is no more than 350 to 400 feet deep, is shot by Dr. David Zink, historian and explorer. Now the travelers near the destination they have come far to find, in the waters off Bimini Island. The odd, reversed J shape called the Bimini Road. Though it has been surmised that much of the construction or its surrounding area still lies concealed under the shifting sands of the bottom, more than a third of a mile, the length of 6 football fields, lies clearly defined, a puzzle with no easy answer. Slowly wheeling into the wind, Philippe brings the converted World War II reconnaissance and rescue aircraft down to a landing almost directly above the Great J. Now seaborne, the versatile flying boat becomes a headquarters for aquatic exploration. With co-pilot Michael Sullivan and other members of the team, Philippe soon exchanges flyer's garb for a diver's gear. Now makes a descent direct from the seaplane itself. Guided by Dr. Zink, the divers move through the warm, shallow waters, hardly 15 feet deep, at last reach the so-called road itself. This, some students believe, is a visible fragment of Atlantean civilization from which both Egypt and the pre-Columbian cultures of Central America learned the arts of pyramid building. Those convinced that the road is the work of megalithic builders in early historic times argue that only a highly skilled human agency could have chiseled the square edges of these 15-ton stones and assembled them as a pavement, bearing no natural relationship to the bedrock. Nevertheless, core samples have shown that both pavement and underlying rock are composed of the same consolidated limestone sediment. Atlantis or no, the structure today is guarded by nothing more than an occasional poisonous rockfish camouflaged among the stones. Later, on the wing of the PBY, Philippe and Dr. Zink discuss possible explanations for the site.
What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's a megalithic site.
Which is?
The big stones, the Greek words, the big stones, such as the megalithic sites in Europe, Karnak, Brittany, Stonehenge in England.
They were a people that had some, and I can't prove it yet, but I suspect a people of some astronomical sophistication, a people that by some means or another could handle at least 15-ton stones, were well organized enough to plan out a project and carry it out.
Various peoples were in the area generally, but
this seems to relate to no known culture pattern. We encountered so many problems with various compasses here underwater, we suspect some kind of energy pattern here that's affecting the magnetic field. I don't know what it is, but
you have ruled out in your mind, and you are sure yourself that this is not natural formation.
That's about all I'm sure about.
Yes.
My argument is essentially morphological in structure, the patterns. In nature, it's most unusual to have joints terminate abruptly. We would expect, if this were a natural formation of beach rock formed in place here, we would expect it to have a little more substantial relationship to the bedrock. And as you saw, it does not. We're often little stones supporting, leaving a space under. The horseshoe, of course, it opens to the northeast. It is, you saw the extension, which makes it into a horseshoe, taking it out of a reverse J configuration and in more of a horseshoe or hairpin kind of opening to the northeast. Here's where the fracture is, and here's where the transition
from large stones to small stones.
Yeah, and the 5 across, too. 14 single stones here, and 5 across here.
But here we have 6.
6 following after, yes.
Do you think it's possible that Plato would have made it up entirely?
Anything is possible, but, well, in a time of difficulty, in a time of agony about the present and the future, it's so easy to look to a golden age, you know, and it's comfortable psychologically. It's a rationalization, in short. Well, that's one way to interpret it. But there are other ways.
What would be the impact if it was found?
The impact, of course, anyone who has the slightest interest in Atlantis is interested in it because of its impact, and its impact essentially would be, I suppose, look out, maybe you'll go down the drain too. You know, a highly sophisticated civilization can fail.
Despite its many forms, the Atlantis legend has but a single source, Plato, who told of a rich land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, its capital city ringed by canals and inhabited by a people noble and wise, all shattered and sunk in a single day. Though modern ocean mapping has found no suitable scar, Cousteau points out that man's invention has imagined Atlantis almost anywhere. Easter Island in the south and Coco Island in the north are thought fragments of a Pacific continent called Mu, a variant of the Atlantis legend. Bimini in the West Atlantic, the Canary Islands off Africa, the Azores, the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, Helgoland off Germany in the North Sea, the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. For each, ardent supporters have argued its claim to be Plato's earthly paradise. Yet legend sometimes grows around a kernel of fact. Myth often serves a continuing human need, a faith to buttress man against adversity. On the north coast of Crete, at Epiphany each January 6th, the people of Heraklion follow their guardian priests in solemn procession to perform an annual ritual. Not far from Calypso, lying at the stone jetty, the procession moves to the harbor's edge. There, as the blessed cross is thrown into the water and quickly retrieved, the people celebrate a communion with the sea, ancient long before Christianity. Only several miles away, on the high land above the modern harbor, the ruins of the great palace of Knossos lie silent now. But here once was the center of a fabled civilization. Here, from 3000 BC, Minoan kings ruled the seas of the eastern Mediterranean for 1,500 years. Yet oddly, they had no safe harbor then along a coast swept by the fierce northwest wind, the Meltemi. As a mariner, Cousteau finds the paradox intolerable. To rule the seas, one must have a safe and ample port. But where? The island 7 miles away? Visited only by occasional fishermen or the priest who comes to perform mass once a year, Dia is silent and uninhabited. Yet as Cousteau observes the bays of its deeply indented southern or leeward side, he feels a gathering certainty that ships have found shelter here since early times. No sooner has Calypso dropped anchor than the diving team prepares to make its first exploratory descent from the launch, hopeful that history has left its evidence scattered upon the bottom. Albert Falco, the chief diver, is particularly eager. From an earlier dive in the waters off the island years ago, he remembers a glimpse of a copper plate near a half-buried ancient galley. With Cousteau, an interested observer awaits the result. Dr. Crete, archaeologist and representative of the Greek government. Almost at once, at about 100 feet of depth, the divers' lights begin to reveal a submerged field of artifacts. The scattered array of pottery and miscellaneous debris from hundreds of years of trade, war, piracy, and casual accidents of the sea. Elegant and alone, a coffee urn gleams in the light. Everywhere, it seems, jars and amphoras from periods as far back as Roman times lie half embedded in the sediment of the bottom. Again at the surface, the diving team hurries back to Calypso. Even at a distance, seen from the deck of the ship, they hardly appear as bearers of bad news. As the launch pulls alongside, Falco quickly confirms Cousteau's conjectures regarding Dia's use as a shelter for ships. Though Falco has not found his remembered galley, he reports the riches that litter the bottom. Unnumbered amphora and other pottery, many of them still almost intact.
Et au fond, il y en a sûrement d'autres. Parce que quand on voit tout ce qui s'est cassé là-dessus, sûrement d'autres bateaux.
Immediately, Cousteau joins the search. Accompanied by Falco, he now makes a descent in the Soucoupe, the self-contained diving saucer, extending the range of the first reconnaissance. At 120 feet, there looms from the bottom the coagulated cargo of a Roman shipwreck, dating from the 1st century after Christ. Nearby, a more recent relic appears, a rusted anchor probably lost during the Venetian siege of Crete. In bay after bay, reefs of pottery mark the sites of other sunken ships. Clearly, over a period of at least 2,000 years, Dia has been a crossroads of maritime traffic in the eastern Mediterranean. Because aerial views sometimes reveal the tracings of ancient pathways or structures not visible on the ground, an electric camera is bolted to the undercarriage of the helicopter to shoot a connected sequence of vertical views showing the entire island. From the air, the stony hills and sheer cliffs of Dia suggest little possible connection to a myth of Atlantis. Barren and forbidding, the vestiges of one-time walls and structures now enclose only emptiness. Amid the rocks grows a thinly scattered vegetation, barely enough to provide forage for the small bands of Crete, an endangered species of wild goat introduced on the island in what may be a futile effort to save it. Now, for the first time, at St. George's Bay, Cousteau sees the vague, milky outline of an underwater shelf jutting out from the shore of the peninsula. With Falco and cameraman Carco Pino in the wardroom aboard ship, Cousteau performs the painstaking task of joining the helicopter pictures in a complete mosaic of the island.
Et un, pas tout à fait au coin, là où il y a 2-3 épaisseurs. Au coin de 3 épaisseurs.
But as he carefully connects the broken fragments of landscape shown in the photographs, Cousteau cannot free his mind of the enigmatic image beneath the surface of St. George's Bay. What is it? Some natural feature, perhaps? Its outline seems too regular. More and more, Cousteau surmises that the underwater structure was built by human hands.
Again, I enter a world at once familiar and strange, a world of subtle sensory distortions. Here, it is easy to believe in myth. As we slowly pass over the weed-grown site, it is soon apparent that this is no natural formation. But what could be the purpose of a submerged, man-built mound rising 65 feet from the bottom at its outer extremity? I can only assume that it stood out of the sea in ancient times when, by modern calculation, the level of the Mediterranean was 10 to 15 feet lower than now. Though the mound is constructed mainly of rubble and ordinary round stones, There lie here and there carefully chiseled building blocks which serve no function and whose presence so far from shore seems inexplicable. Together, Bernard and I swim along the lateral wall, pause briefly at a wide furrow that breaks the slope. At last, we pass upward to reach the flat top of the mound, barely 10 feet below the surface. Abruptly, all is clear. We are on the wide expanse of a rounded jetty. Along its sides and in the water beyond, the harbor is crowded with broad-hulled merchant ships and even sleek war galleys of a dozen nations. On these stones jostle men of Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, and Sicily, working, trading, gambling, gossiping, so often they share a mutual vocabulary of hardly half a dozen words. This warehouse, whose remnant wall we measure, is crammed with bales of wool and fiber, with rows of amphora filled with oil and wines and salted meats and spices, for certainly here is one of the great intersections of the ancient world. Here, a ship stands on braces while a crew seals its ruptured hull. Of course, it was taken up this V-shaped ramp or groove by which ships are hauled from the water for repair. And surely for such a harbor there must have been a large town, walled no doubt against the pirates that infest the seas. I pause. Is it true? Or am I too engaged in myth building? I return to the surface.
Based on the mosaic, Cousteau has prepared an overlay showing the port and its huge fortified wall, nearly all now erased. Could it have been brought down by the legendary eruption at Thera to the north, which some believe caused the downfall of Minoan Crete? Perhaps, but as yet there is no proof that Dia existed at the time of Knossos. To hasten the search, a new craft is now formally added to Calypso's auxiliary fleet. The diving platform Ulysse, christened by Madame Cousteau in an appropriate ceremony. Later, tricolor flying, the raft is taken on its maiden voyage across the bay to the site of its first mission. For what becomes one of the most systematic underwater excavations ever attempted, Cousteau and Cretsas have selected a prospective site, 10 meters square, close to the sunken harbor jetty. Led by Bernard Delamotte, the divers prepare the area, sinking stakes at each corner for the strings which will mark the boundaries. For greater precision in fixing the location of any found artifact, the enclosure will be further subdivided into 25 smaller units, each 2 meters square. As the area at last is ready to be cleared for the dig, a large frame with 2 triangular supports is lowered into position on the bottom. Sliding along its crossbar, cameras will make stereoscopic photographs of each stage of the excavation. Aboard the Ulysses, the divers prepare to descend. This time, instead of the usual individual air tanks, they will depend upon a hookah, a system of multiple hoses whereby each diver draws his air from a common source, fed by a compressor. But soon, complaints forgotten. The suction pipe is lowered, the team suits up and plunges to the work site below. On bottom, each member of the team exchanges his diving fins for a shorter pair, less cumbersome in walking about the dig area. To counteract his natural buoyancy and prevent him from bouncing as he walks, each man wears a 20-pound weight at his groin to hold him down. With a signal to the surface, the Seuss is placed in action. Using the utmost care, the divers begin to draw the top stratum of sediment into the suction pipe, for nothing can be removed or unnecessarily disturbed without the prior consent of the Greek government representative, Dr. Calypsos. To retrieve even the smallest artifacts, the sediment and water are flushed through a strainer aboard the diving raft. For each 12-inch layer, more than 1,000 cubic feet of dirt and sand must be sifted. As the days pass and the first layer is gradually removed, a restless Cousteau dives to the site to learn why the dig is not proceeding more rapidly. Actually, he is well aware that the answer is self-evident. Amid this alien intrusion, schools of little red mullet veer to and fro. More distant, a spirograph or tube worm tosses like a flower in the spring breeze. Slowly, an increasing array of objects is emerging from centuries of oblivion. Yet each is left in place until it can be labeled, charted, photographed, and drawn. Meanwhile, the mullet have overcome their fear. Probing for the tiny sea organisms exposed by the Seuss, they are having a feast. After the first 12-inch layer of sediment is cleared, a crowded segment lies exposed. Here, history speaks in the mute language of clay, shaped for ordinary use by human hands, all unknowing that in 500 years or 5,000, other hands would receive them, touch them and wonder, give them an importance never foreseen or intended. Nevertheless, the cameras are recording a growing visual diary. Photographed by the stereoscopic cameras, the lines of the grid, like the minutes or centuries by which we divide time, suddenly frame the past. At last brought to the surface, each piece, broken or whole, is measured, catalogued, and again photographed by Dr. Crete and his assistant.
Και διάμετρο σωζωμένη 16.
Much of the pottery carries curious monograms or insignia scratched into the clay. These Crete carefully traces for further analysis by himself and other classical scholars, while nearby, his volunteer helper prepares a drawing. Escorted by Bernard Delamotte, Cousteau arrives to visit the shore team.
Bonjour. Vous avez vu ce qu'on a remonté ce matin, là?
By a tantalizing paradox, each discovery seems to open a new mystery. Displaying the artifacts brought up from the deepening excavation in the bay, Crete and Delamotte explain that all have been found above a curious bed of gravel that extends through the site and seems to serve as a dividing zone between eras.
Avant d'arriver au gravier. Sur le gravier, c'est posé sur le gravier. Posé sur le gravier. Il y en a quelques-uns. Parce que les carrés commencent à se remplir. Quelques morceaux vont commencer à apparaître. Ça, c'est que la surface, je crois, non?
Ah oui, c'est la surface.
Pratiquement la surface.
With few exceptions, most of the pottery recovered above the gravel stratum belongs to the Byzantine period in the Christian era, including several ingenious pitchers with a built-in strainer at the neck. But any artifacts of earlier cultures, if they are present, still lie buried in the sediment on the bottom. As the dig goes on, a wall of discarded rubble and stone grows beside it, most of it without particular significance. Yet again, Cousteau is struck by the increasing numbers of building stones that have been encountered. Again wonders what great natural convulsion could have swept them so far from land. As with the great Greek archaeologist Marinatos, who found evidence of a vast tidal wave on the coast of Crete, earthquake alone no longer seems to provide an adequate explanation. More readily identified, a growing treasure of amphoras, bowls, and pitchers are sent to the surface in the recovery baskets. Aboard the diving raft, the pots and shards are carefully separated and later cleaned of incrustations of sponges and other sea growth. Examining the recently recovered artifacts with Delamont, Crete explains that with each stratum excavated, the dig is probing deeper and deeper into the past. Though formerly almost all the pottery was Byzantine, now much of the material is Egyptian or Roman, even includes one or two pieces from the classical period of Greece in the 5th century before Christ. Clearly, the pots represent a transitional period to an earlier culture. But of Minoan artifacts, there is no sign.
The falcons rule the sky over Dia. That is their illusion. Actually, these falcons are a dying species. Like the wild goats, the Crete, they exist here at the pleasure of man. Most contradictory of creatures, he alone creates sanctuaries for his victims. For himself, there are no sanctuaries against his follies. Yet, as I look at the barren landscape, once timbered and green, I cannot believe that man alone created this desolation. I remember the legend of Atlantis' sudden destruction, the belief of some scholars that Minoan civilization, centered in Crete, may well have been the model 900 years before Plato for the Atlantis he described. As yet, however, the dig has revealed nothing to show that the port of Dia existed as early as Minoan Crete across the bay.
At the bottom of St. George's Bay, the excavation is coming to an end. After many weeks of effort, after digging through 10 feet of successive ancient strata, the divers at last are reaching an unyielding bed of solid rock. It is here, at the greatest depth, that the first evidence of Dia's earliest origins are found. A cup that clearly belongs to the Minoan epoch. It is the most important single artifact recovered at the site. Later, after the Calypsos has been raised, and after Dr. Crete has authenticated the period, a number of other Minoan pieces are found. Not many, For in those early times, men were less wasteful in discarding possessions than later civilizations which would invent planned obsolescence. At a time when rule of the antique world rested with masters of the sea, Minoan Crete controlled the Mediterranean from Sicily to the Middle East. A starkly simple, unadorned cup reaffirms that as early as Minoan times, the key to Crete lay in the port of Dia. Upon the open ground, Cousteau and Calypsos find shards of pottery from various periods, even find the obsidian so desired by the ancients in the making of tools and weapons.
Obsidian stones. Look at that.
But if Dia was port and military outpost for the Minoan kings at Knossos in Crete, do the building blocks at the bottom of St. George's Bay indicate a natural disaster that left Crete defenseless and caused its abrupt decline? Was Minoan Crete Atlantis? Perhaps, but there is a flaw. Unlike Atlantis, Crete did not vanish under the sea.
We are at the top of this desert island, you know. It's amazing that we find so many things around these ruins. And who could have built this here? There are heaps of stones that probably were much higher in the past. And what amazes me is this big flat stone over there.
You think
and
it's not natural?
Here. I don't think it's natural. I think it has been, it's probably natural, but it has been flattened. I cannot help looking at this desert to be baffled, to be absolutely bedazzled. So close from Crete to find remains of civilization and no vegetation. Do you think it has been always that way? No.
I don't think so.
No. I'd like to have seen it in antiquity.
Even in model, the palace at Knossos is an apparition on an astonishing scale. Here for 1,500 years, the Minoan kings presided over a high culture long before Greece was born. In these porticos and terraces, these courtyards and balustraded stairs, existed the scented aristocracy of a rich and talented civilization that would lie forgotten for 2,000 years. Here were born the legends of the bull worshippers, of Theseus' slaughter of the Minotaur, and of his escape from the palace labyrinth, led by Ariadne's thread. Perhaps, too, it was here that Plato's legend of Atlantis was born, for its similarities to Crete are many. Today, Knossos is a silent ruin, buried and unknown, until the English archaeologist Evans began clearing the site at the turn of the century. But what could have brought its precipitate destruction? All civilizations, like man, ultimately falter and die, by the infirmities of old age, sometimes by their own blind arrogance, sometimes, as in the legend of Atlantis, by a natural calamity. Today, there are clear evidences. Volcanic ash on the sea floor, coastal structures swept away, even biblical legends of plague and disaster, that the East Mediterranean was swept by an unparalleled cataclysm in the 15th century before Christ. To learn the answers, Calypso will go farther still through the Aegean and on to the island once shattered by what has been called the greatest explosion ever heard on Earth.